If you've ever earned good money but still felt financially exposed, LeBron James's story matters, because if your income depends on you producing, performing, staying relevant, closing deals, creating results, then you're more exposed than you think. And most people never realize that while the money is still flowing. Because from the outside, LeBron's story looks like athletic dominance, 4 championships, multiple MVP awards, over 2 decades in the NBA, more than $500 million in career earnings and endorsements, the first active NBA player to become a billionaire. But the most important part of the story isn't basketball, it's what he built around basketball. Because LeBron didn't simply create income, he gradually built control. And that distinction changes everything. Most people assume LeBron's wealth came from being one of the greatest athletes in history. And basketball certainly created enormous opportunity. But opportunity alone was never the system. Because athletic careers end, attention shifts, industries evolve, and when all income depends on personal performance, exposure eventually follows. What makes LeBron different is that he appears to have recognized that problem unusually early. And this is where the story becomes more interesting. Because before Spring Hill became a media company, before billion-dollar headlines, before major business acquisitions, there was a decision most people barely remember. At 20 years old, LeBron moved away from the traditional athlete management model and built LRMR with childhood friends he trusted. Over time, LRMR evolved into the home office managing investments, partnerships, branding, media ventures, and business operations surrounding his growing empire. At first glance, that might not seem important, but structurally, it changed everything, because most athletes focus on maximizing income. LeBron appears to have focused on controlling the infrastructure around the income, and those are very different objectives. The money was already coming. Nike, NBA contracts, endorsements, global visibility. The income problem had largely been solved, but the control problem had not. And this is the part most high earners never stop to consider. Generating income and controlling income are not the same thing. One creates cash flow, the other creates leverage. Over the years, LeBron expanded beyond endorsements into ownership positions and strategic investments. He invested in Blaze Pizza long before it became a national success. He acquired stakes connected to Fenway Sports Group and Liverpool FC. He participated in equity opportunities instead of relying exclusively on endorsement checks. But even those investments are not the most important part of the story, because eventually LeBron and Maverick Carter began building something much larger. Not another endorsement, not another sponsorship, a media company. And this is where everything starts to change. Most people saw an athlete. LeBron appears to have seen a distribution problem, because throughout entertainment, sports, and business, there is a recurring pattern. The performer creates value. Someone else controls distribution. The creator generates attention. Someone else owns the platform. The athlete produces the audience. Someone else monetizes the audience. That pattern exists everywhere. And for many people, it remains invisible until they recognize who actually controls the system. Spring Hill emerged from that realization. The company combined content production, athlete storytelling, brand development, marketing, and media infrastructure under one umbrella. It eventually attracted major investors and achieved significant valuation growth. In 2024 and 2025, Spring Hill merged with Fullwell Entertainment to expand global scale and distribution capabilities. Most people focused on the valuation, but the valuation wasn't the lesson. The lesson was control. Because media ownership changes the relationship between talent and opportunity. When someone owns the distribution channel, they are no longer limited to participating in someone else's ecosystem. They begin building their own. And this is where many viewers should pause for a moment. Because this story is no longer about LeBron, it's about dependency, commission earners, sales professionals, entrepreneurs, creators, operators, high-performing W-2 earners, people who have proven they can generate results, people who know how to create income, but people whose financial lives may still depend heavily on their continued production. And that's where exposure begins, not because they're unsuccessful, because they are successful. Success often hides dependency. The checks arrive, the commissions close, the clients stay, the promotions happen, and as long as everything continues working, the underlying exposure remains difficult to see. This is where most high earners actually are, not in failure, but in exposure, because the system may still depend on them showing up tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. If you're starting to recognize that pattern in your own life, that's exactly why the free O.N.C.E school community exists. Not for people looking for shortcuts, for people beginning to recognize the difference between earning income and building structure. Because once you see the difference, you start asking different questions, and those questions change everything. Now here's where many people misunderstand LeBron's story. They assume the lesson is ownership, but ownership is only part of it. The deeper lesson is distribution control, because ownership without distribution still creates limitations. You can own something valuable and still depend on someone else's platform to reach the market. You can own a product and still depend on someone else's audience. You can own a business and still depend on someone else's ecosystem. Control over distribution changes that equation. That's why media companies matter. That's why audience ownership matters. That's why platforms matter. And that's why Spring Hill is such an important case study. The company wasn't simply creating content. It was creating a system capable of producing, packaging, and distributing stories. And those stories were no longer dependent on a basketball game happening that night. That's a completely different form of leverage. And this is the part most people never see coming. Because many high earners spend years becoming exceptional producers, but they never become system owners. They become the engine, the rainmaker, the top salesperson, the key operator, the primary producer, and eventually, the business becomes dependent on them. That's not leverage, that's concentration. The uncomfortable reality is that many people don't own businesses. They own demanding jobs that happen to pay well. The system still revolves around their effort, their schedule, their expertise, their availability. And once they stop producing, the income slows down. LeBron's business evolution points in a different direction. Basketball created attention. Attention created influence. Influence created opportunity. Opportunity was converted into infrastructure, and infrastructure created leverage. Notice what happened. The focus gradually shifted away from personal production and towards system ownership. That's the transition most high earners eventually need to make. Not because income is bad, because income alone isn't enough. If you've been paying attention to the stories in this series, you may notice something interesting. The industries change, the personalities change, but the structural problem stays remarkably similar. Some people lose money because structure is missing. Others build extraordinary wealth because structure is present, but the lesson is often the same. Control determines durability. And this is where LeBron's story stands apart. This isn't primarily a story about avoiding failure. It's a story about intentionally building leverage before failure ever becomes a possibility. That's a much more advanced form of thinking. Because wealth protection doesn't begin after a crisis, it begins before one. And that's where many people get trapped. They wait until pressure appears, until business slows, until the market changes, until a major client leaves, until commissions decline, until health becomes an issue. By then, the options are often more limited. The strongest structures are usually built while things are going well, and that appears to be exactly what LeBron and his team were doing. Not reacting, positioning, not protecting income, building systems beyond income, which leads to a question that eventually confronts every producer. If your income stopped tomorrow, what would still pay you? Because that question reveals more than almost any financial statement. It reveals dependency. It reveals leverage. It reveals structure. And it reveals whether you're building a system or simply sustaining one. The goal was never to earn income forever. It was to build something that doesn't depend entirely on you. That's the shift. From producer to owner, from performer to architect, from income earner to structure builder. And that's what makes LeBron's story important. Not because he became wealthy, not because he became famous, not because he became a billionaire, because he appears to have recognized that visibility is temporary, performance is temporary, even extraordinary careers are temporary. But control over systems can continue long after performance ends. There is a specific way high earners structure these transitions correctly. Most people never learn it while they're busy chasing the next deal, the next sale, the next promotion, or the next opportunity, so they continue building income without building insulation underneath the income. and eventually exposure becomes visible. If your income stopped tomorrow, what would still pay you? Because that question eventually forces every high performer to confront the same reality. Not the appearance of success, the structure underneath it, and that structure determines everything. If you're earning income, producing results, building momentum, and beginning to recognize that your financial life still depends heavily on your continued effort, you're exactly who the free O.N.C.E school community was built for. Not because you're behind, because you're becoming aware. Aware of the difference between income and leverage, between visibility and control, between production and ownership. That's where structural thinking begins. And that's where the next phase of the journey starts. Because the goal was never just to earn, it was to control.